Senator Harder.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, it wasn't that long ago that taking a drive down Highway 7 west of here, just past Perth, would lead you to a little rest stop where you could feed Coca-Cola and ice cream to a pair of black bears confined in a roadside cage. The stop was one of many such enclosures during the 1970s, meant to lure you off the road to grab a bite, either on your way to Ottawa for a vacation or heading home in the opposite direction. Snapshots of smiling young kids standing in front of the cages or feeding the bears dot the history blogs and local museums in the villages where these pens once stood. Societal mores and values change. In a lot of cases, visitors didn't know or appreciate the neglect or deprivation these poor animals suffered. But today we do know, which is why an important bill S-241, is before us. A very wide-ranging bill which, among other protections, limits the captivity and provides additional protections to many species and needs to be supported in this chamber. Thankfully, the vast majority of these roadside attractions I just mentioned no longer exist. But several other types of animal confinement do, including roadside zoos, which house big cats, wolves, and dangerous reptiles like crocodiles and pythons, and bears. Bears have a special place in my heart, as anyone who has seen some of the art in my office will know. They also occupy a special place in the identity of our nation and within the cultures of many Indigenous peoples. The polar bear, for example, is respected by Inuit hunters as the most intelligent animal in Canada's Arctic and as a symbol of the resilience, the patience, and the determination that is needed to survive in this harsh climate. This, according to a polar bear traditional knowledge study authored in 2015. The West Coast spirit bear, or Kermode, became an important point of debate in this chamber just 3 years ago during the discussion of Bill C-48, which banned tanker traffic from the northwest coast of BC. Depending on estimates, there are only between 400 and 1,200 of these light-colored bears left, all living in that part of our country. They are deeply important to the Indigenous nations living there. And like polar bears, spirit bears are especially adapted to their habitat. Their white fur makes them particularly suited to hunting salmon because their white fur prevents them from standing out against the sky. And then, of course, there are grizzly bears, who protect their cubs with an intensity that stands out amongst other species. The grizzly bear's Latin name is Ursus horribilis, which means terrifying bear, an appropriate moniker for an animal that is more likely to attack than flee when feeling threatened. Of the many species this bill covers, bears need particularly large habitats to thrive. Captive polar bears, along with orcas and other cetaceans, suffer from more sickness and psychologically related illnesses than other animals kept in captivity, according to literature prepared by the Britain-based Bear Conservation. Bears are highly intelligent animals that can suffer both mentally and physically while in captivity. This bill solves a real and pressing problem surrounding their welfare. In Ontario, in past years, there have been media reports of attacks from other bears on cubs born in captivity. One Ontario zoo recently kept a black bear in a 25-foot by 25-foot enclosure for over 25 years. A representative of ZooCheck commented that this was probably the worst bear enclosure in North America. Before its death, prior to the onset of the pandemic, that particular bear exhibited abnormal, stereotypic behavior like pacing and lying unnaturally still. Bears have also been used in television and film in Canada in recent years, and this bill would require a provincial license for that activity. In total, there are more than 25 zoos in our nation that continue to keep bears. Bill S-241 aims to protect them, and others by limiting new captivity to justified situations with licensing requirements that protect their well-being. The bill also prohibits the use of bears in performance for entertainment and grants them limited legal standing, allowing for court orders in their best interests, such as relocation with costs, illegal breeding or performance were to occur. As with Canada's 2019 whale and dolphins law, the penalty for these summary offences would be a fine of up to $200,000. Specifically, this bill attempts to protect these species by prohibiting the acquisition of new bears, including through captivity or capture or breeding, as well as through transfer, including imports and exports, unless licensed in one of three ways. First, similar to the Whale and Dolphins Act, an organization could apply for a license allowing captivity of its bears in the bear's best interest regarding individual welfare and conservation. For example, qualified persons could take an orphan cub or problem bear that have come in contact with people and pose a safety risk. Licenses could also provide better homes for captive bears currently living in inadequate conditions. Bear sanctuaries can still thrive under this bill. Opportunities exist to save bears and to provide further public education, and for some existing locations holding bears to evolve. The bill also provides it is not an offence for anyone to help an animal in distress, to ensure no interference with rescues. Second, an organization could become licensed to acquire bears for non-harmful scientific research. This would justify new forms of captivity that allows us to learn vital scientific information about bears. In this way, the law would not prohibit the collection of hypothetical data in captive conditions that could help wild polar bears survive, such as with the disappearance of sea ice. In all such licensing decisions, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, and in some contexts the province, should consider the individual welfare and prospective importance and credibility of any research. Third, an organization can acquire new bears if they are designated as a Jane Goodall Act animal care organization. Such organizations must serve purposes aligned with animal welfare, conservation, science, and public education objectives. This designation can allow credible organizations, such as Canada's leading zoos, aquariums, and sanctuaries, to conduct their operations without an undue administrative burden. This bill proposes 7 zoos and aquariums as initial organizations. Such organizations must continue to meet 5 transparent and accessible criteria to protect animals, including the highest standards of care, whistleblower protection, responsible acquisition of animals, and no circus-style shows or use of animals in performance in TV or film. Of great importance, such organizations must also meet any conditions established by the Minister on the basis of the best scientific and expert information after, of course, consultations. Such conditions could be specific to the species or a particular facility and could restrict breeding. Senators, we need the Jane Goodall Act to protect bears in the same way we needed to protect other animals on the list, including big cats, the subject of such controversy in the very recent past. It's estimated that close to 40 zoos keep big cats in our country, while estimates for private ownership range between an astonishing 3,600 to 7,000 animals. Bill S-241 is wide-ranging and groundbreaking in many other ways, and it would be a disservice to the bill to try to discuss its many facets in the short time allotted to me. Perhaps, though, it's worth touching on a significant portion of the bill, which grants limited legal standing to animals in criminal sentencing for captive offences, notably illegal breeding or use of performance. While this standing is restricted because it applies only within limited proceedings, criminal as opposed to civil, which is in the provincial domain, it is still a significant precedent given that virtually no jurisdictions grant animals any standing whatsoever. The practical effect of the bill could, for example, see the forced relocation with costs of all of the roadside zoo big cats if it were found that any of the zoo cats were to have been illegally bred. Similarly, If a proprietor were to stage an illegal whale show, the same could apply for the relocation of whales. This new version of the Goodall Act also encourages the Government of Ontario to grant civil standing to Kiska, the lone orca at marine land, and basically advocates for recognition of her rights as an individual. I've been a strong advocate for a Senate whose role is generally circumscribed by sober second thought, amendment, and representation of regional and minority views. There are times, however, when I believe it can lead, and this is one of those occasions, in part because this bill is also included in the ministerial mandate letter. Moreover, Dr. Jane Goodall, former Senator of St. Clair, and now my colleague, Senator Klein, have highlighted the urgent plight of our wildlife and how it squares with our goals for reconciliation. The bill is also widely supported by organizations and individuals from across the country, including the coastal First Nations of British Columbia, where the spirit bear's habitat is located. This is consistent with the history of these nations in protecting the great bears of the rainforest, the cetaceans of the sea, and all other creatures in the temperate bioregion. They are also leaders, working with Canada and British Columbia in advancing the largest network of marine protection areas in Canada's Pacific coast. Let me close by saying there's also a spiritual element of respect inherent in this bill for the kindred spirit of all living things. Mahatma Gandhi once said that the greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by the way its animals are treated. I think there's some truth in this. Protecting and respecting animals elevates our humanity. Neglecting them degrades it. Discussing his own esteem for animals, the great humorist Will Rogers summed it up better than I could ever do. He said, "If there are no dogs in heaven, when I die, I want to go where they went." Thank you.